Welcome to Mindset, a podcast sponsored by Mind the Product Training. Each session, myself and a special guest will take questions from our larger product community, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some new ways of thinking about the product that you're currently building, and some resources and pathways to overcoming the challenges that you face. If you find this podcast helpful, share it with your fellow product managers and keep sending us questions. So I'm really excited for this session of Mindset. The theme that I've really been thinking about for this session is all about how important it is for product managers to really build communities around themselves, because as we all know, product managers don't typically work with a lot of other product managers. We only really work with ourselves. We have, hopefully, fingers crossed, if all's going well, cross-functional teams where you have a designer, an engineer, marketing people, whatever other resources and capacities you need around you. But it's very rare that we work directly or are able to pair with another product manager. So oftentimes when we're working on products or projects, we really only have our own internal monologues to keep us company. And so I found, as I developed my career, one of the things that was incredibly helpful was finding product mentors and groups of product managers who are willing to come together to be open and transparent and vulnerable about their challenges. And that's where I've really learned the most. So every single question that we've selected today, I think kind of hinges on that theme of talking to other product managers, creating a sense of community. And I am so very, very excited to welcome our very special guest today, Adam Warburton. Adam is not only head of product and design for all of Co-op. Is that correct?
Yeah, head of digital products.
Head of digital products for Co-op. Adam is also one of our trainers. You teach in our public workshops in Manchester. And I'm not exactly sure how you find the time to do it, but you also are one of our co-organizers for MTP Engage.
Yep.
So MTP Engage Manchester is one of our more local conferences that happens in March in Manchester.
February the 7th.
February the 7th. Okay, check. I know. I have a good grip on our calendar. February the 7th in Manchester. And to me, I find the Engages that we run are some of my favorite conferences. We have an Engage in Hamburg and Engage in Manchester. And they're a little bit smaller, and they're really focused on the local community. And you get to see incredible stories, sort of network effect come out, and the energy in the place is really wonderful. I think it sort of brims with local pride. I think people are really excited to see some of their own on stage talking about what's going on in their local product communities, and I just think it's all around a little bit more fun. Tell me about what your favorite thing about the Engages are.
Similar to yours, so with Engage, the key is in the name. So Engage, it is about seeing local speakers up on the stage, and not people that are going to get on a flight back to wherever in the world they've come from to speak, but speakers that are going to be available at lunch, available in the breaks, and even people that you can connect to after the event and meet up. And we had stories last year of mentors and coaches and groups that formed. There's a coffee morning now that formed off the back of the conference, and it really is that sense of like a conference that's about engaging together.
Yeah,
that's my favorite part.
So in your role as head of digital product for Co-op, how do you attempt to kind of facilitate this sort of collaboration and sharing among product managers?
So every discipline, so not just within product management, but a Co-op has a community of practice. So for us, it really is an opportunity to have some group therapy.
Yeah.
So a group of product managers in a room, and Co-op's got a very diverse set of products and businesses. So we might have a product manager that's working on a funeral care product, sat with someone that's working on a food product, sat with somebody that's working on a health product or an insurance product. And the collective benefit of bringing those people together in a community of practice and sharing best practice and working on how can we collaborate on a single style for a roadmap or a single style for strategy presentations, just so that it starts to feel familiar when you work with a digital team no matter where.
Yeah.
There's real benefit in bringing all of the PMs together to try and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, amazing. Should we tackle some of these questions?
Yep, we can try.
This will be fun. All right, so we collect questions from both our Mindset type form on the internet as well as from questions that we receive in our public workshops. So today the questions are a little bit of a mix. So this one comes from our Foundations training workshop that we had recently in London. And the question is, what do you do when you know you're not getting the best out of your team?
I suppose there's two parts to that, isn't there? There's how do you know you're getting the best out of the team? And then what do you do if the answer's no?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we can assume we're not getting the best out of the team, and we might be getting the best out of the individuals we've got in the way in which they're organised. And actually the things that we need to change is maybe we need more people on the team, or maybe we need to organise ourselves differently or structure our roles differently. And then once you've kind of nailed that, then you can look at, am I getting the best out of the group of people that we've got here?
Yeah.
The key thing for me in terms of are we getting the best is always just to look at the pace of the delivery of value. So are we continuously delivering value? Now value can be in the form of learning, it can be in the form of prototyping, user testing, or actual delivery and shipping a product.
Yeah.
But ultimately it's like, are we focused on that? Do we have clarity around that? And are we achieving that?
Yeah, I think I really like the way you've broken that down, which is kind of two parts always. You have to be able to define what best looks like, and then you have to understand how you're measuring towards that. I read this really interesting tweet this past week, which is that velocity is future tech debt. And sometimes if you look at it that way, would you really be in such a rush to kind of continue to sort of up the velocity at all times? And so in any situation when you're understanding performance, you have to recognize what you're incentivizing and see that there are trade-offs to any sort of thing that you think is outwardly a benefit, like velocity, or pushing as many features out to your customers as possible. Well, if you're not really pushing the right things out, or velocity is just future tech debt, then are you really incentivizing the right behavior? And so I think as product managers who are responsible for setting up processes for the team, I think one of the ways that you can understand if you're getting the best is by making sure that you're creating a community within your team, or a culture within your team rather, that is really transparent and is really focused on feedback. Because I think one of the first ways you can gut check if the team is performing well is whether or not they say they are. If you've created a sense of safety and people feel like they can give feedback freely, then you're going to hear whether or not things are going well or not going well. So I think one of the best ways to start understanding if things are going well is to make sure that you're instituting a retrospective practice generally. Because your team typically will tell you if things aren't going well or if they are going well, especially if you kind of keep that practice consistent. And then I think in terms of measuring or defining that success, definitely talking to other product managers about what good looks like to them. Because there's lots of different ways that you can define it, can't you? It's kind of like, is there good team culture? Are we delivering value to the customer? Are we working fast and efficiently, or as fast and as efficient as makes sense in terms of the benefit of the team? So it's quite a wide-ranging question. I mean, just off the top of your head, how would you define it, like initially?
I suppose if you go back to like how do you define a good, well-run team, or a good team that's delivering value? It does go back to the fact that product management is an art and not a science.
Yeah.
So I don't jump to story points or velocity, like you say, because they're really just false measures. And more in a lot of our teams, we're not measuring velocity and we're not measuring story points because, they can be gamed. They're not really a true representation of value. Does the thing work? It's far better to look at the underlying product metrics and go, are the metrics moving in the right direction?
Yeah.
And that could be satisfaction, it could be business metrics, etc. So I think taking a more artistic view is probably right. So I think to some product managers, they might feel like they've got a great team, feel like they're delivering lots of value. And the benefit of your community is being able to work with another product manager, like I was talking about in co-op in our communities as a practice, and go work with them for a day. Go sit in their team, go feel what it's like, and you'll begin to get a feeling for, is there an open culture? Are people giving feedback? What does pace look like? What does good look like could be anything from a user stories perspective to a reporting out metrics perspective.
Yeah.
But actually, if you can go and witness another environment, that'll often give you a good barometer as to where you are.
Yeah.
And given that none of this is exact, if you can spend time with enough product managers, you should get a sense of what that scale is in terms of how effective teams are.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of plot yourself somewhere on there.
Yeah, I think that's why in the modern sense of the role, I think it's really helpful, and why we see a lot of product managers who are freelancing or who sort of take shorter contracts or maybe just spend a year or 2 years with the company and then switch, because the product managers that I feel like have a really great sense of what good looks like are ones who have experienced lots of different types of teams, lots of different types of construction around the roles that they work with, and have a feel for healthy teams versus not healthy teams, and can speak to what those feel like more than look like or perform like. I think generally, really interesting. Again, hard to give a precise answer to that question because I think there's a lot of different ways you can go with it, but I hope we've given you some stuff to think about. And in general, I think maybe one thing that you could consider is potentially going and seeing if you can shadow with PMs at an organization that you admire. I think that's always, the grass is always greener, isn't it?
Yep.
And like everyone thinks that, certain unicorn companies or just big names, they must function so well. And yet when you really lift the hood on some of these companies, doesn't necessarily always look so nice.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone that's worked in a big company or gone to a big company, I've worked at some major retailers, and sometimes you wonder how the hell a product gets on the shelf for someone to buy when they walk in a store, because behind the scenes things are chaotic and they're hung together with string and sellotape, but you look from the outside and they're kind of like these huge corporations that get it right every time.
Yeah.
And it is really about getting under the hood. So it's not about a glamour visit to another company where they dress everything up and tell you how amazing they are. It's like, is there a product manager that I trust, that I can kind of, they'll show me where the skeletons are in this organization, they'll tell me what's going on.
Absolutely, 100%. Cool. Should we tackle the next question?
Let's go for it.
All right, let's do it. So this is another question from our training workshops from Foundations in Dublin. And the question is, what is the difference between a product manager and a product owner?
So this question seems to come up in a lot of the training that I've done as well.
Me too.
And I think for me, a lot of it comes from the sense of, if you look at the titles alone, product owner almost has like a more glamorous title than product manager, because it's like you own the thing, you're responsible for the thing, and a product manager feels very much like inward, I'm managing the bits and pieces, but in reality they're the other way around in my head. So a product owner is very much a hands-on managing the detail. It's primarily, have we got the right user stories in the backlog? Is the backlog prioritized? And have we got good acceptance criteria we can work through?
Yeah.
And if you look at the role of a product manager, it's so much broader than that. You might have a product manager that is a product owner on top of everything else that they're doing in their role. But really, product owner feels to me like a role in a Scrum team that can be played by lots of people. Yeah. And a product manager is the job that you do. Yeah,
I would agree with that. One, you hit on a really important thing to call out, which is the derivation of these two roles comes typically from Scrum. So Scrum is a framework that has been used for probably the last 10 to 15 years. Sort of comes out of all of these different learning frameworks, and I've never taken a Scrum training myself, so I don't necessarily have a full grip on sort of the process that they put forward, but they were the first sort of major school of thought that coined the term product owner. And the concept of product owner is that this person is endowed with decision-making capability. This person, the product owner, really is intended to own the product and be able to push the things out to the customers that they deem important, valuable, necessary. Now, I think in reality, the implementation of Scrum has not necessarily always worked to that standard. And product owners are oftentimes not enabled with that decision-making power or capability. And oftentimes, Scrum organizations are extremely hierarchical and have a lot of layers. And so what I've typically seen is that they've got the product owner role, and that person isn't trusted, and there's another layer of hierarchy above them, and so they give this other person the product manager role. Now, to make it really a lot more confusing, then you've got the Agile school, where there is no product owner, there's just the product manager, and that role, again, in theory, is imbued with that decision-making capability. So you have kind of this weird structure and dichotomy where you have product owner and product manager that at the most theoretical, like purest sense, are doing the same exact job. They are the people who should be, the final decision maker in terms of what is most valuable to the product and the customer. In practice, it's not really worked that way, especially with the product owner role. So where you go from here in terms of the difference is really up to you and your organization, right? Have you ever worked at an org where you had product owners and product managers, or no?
Yeah, so I have. And at the co-op at the moment, we have agile business analysts and product managers.
Okay.
And the agile business analyst kind of plays a lot of that product owner style role. And I think what you're hitting on there is that it's different in every organization, isn't it? So we might have these kind of like textbook definitions of product owner, but unless you're in a role in an organization that empowers you to do that role, then you're not. You're a backlog manager and a go-between for the team and the business. Same stands for a product manager if you're not given the right kind of empowerment and the team's not got the right level of autonomy to be able to do its best work. So it's like we can give the textbook definitions of what a product owner is and a product manager is, but in reality there's thousands of them because it really depends on the org and the state of the org and what's going on at that moment in time.
Yeah, I say, when you get to the Mind the Product conference or the Engage in Manchester, ask around, talk to people about their role. Like, what does their role encompass? What's sort of the main driver in terms of their day-to-day? What are their biggest sort of functions or capabilities? I always find it really interesting. Like, when I find somebody who says their title is product owner, I say, what do you do? Tell me, like, what does your role consist of? Oftentimes it is being a backlog manager. It is really managing and focusing on the core team. And the product manager is the person maybe doing that larger stakeholder management or org alignment piece. I've definitely seen those two things wrapped up in the same person. So I think, again, getting back to that core theme of talking to people in your community to understand what's good, what's bad, what's gnarly, what's in between. Talk to people who have both roles and understand, okay, well, what do you do? What do I do? How are they different? Are they better? Again, it's always about focusing on the outcomes that you're attempting to drive forward. I think that's what orgs miss, is they're like titles, roles, processes, and I'm like, but what are we trying to get to? Yeah,
what's the outcome of the role?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, now we can define which camp it sits in. But it's almost like we can do that latterly after we've defined the impact and outcome that we're expecting to get from the role.
Exactly. Is it smoother communication? Is it the team gets its questions answered? Is it stakeholders understand what's going on with the team? Or, priority is made clear all the time? Understanding sort of what the challenge is, what the potential solutions, and then what the outcome is. Focus on that before you talk about titles.
Yep.
Generally.
Yep, completely agree.
Grand. Okay, next question.
Let's go for it.
Okay, so this question, we've got lots of questions from our training workshops. Maybe they're more community oriented. So this question is, how do I engage a development team who works abroad with our personas, user research, and broader design thinking when all they want to do is code?
It's a difficult one.
It's not easy.
Yeah, so I found myself in a similar position.
Really?
Before, but admittedly, the last part of that question of all they want to do is code was not quite true. I think there was a bit more willing to see what was going on in terms of the design thinking process. I think the key here is that you have to tackle the all they want to do is code part. Again, it's another two-part kind of question, because if all they want to do is code, it doesn't matter if you live stream research, or it doesn't matter if you can bring personas and insights closer to them. At the end of the day, if they're so hell-bent on just focusing on coding, nothing else matters. So it's how do you make them appreciate the impact of the work that they're having? Or how do you make them appreciate the value of the output? For me, I would begin to focus on that kind of area, and then we can look at the tools and techniques we've got to drive engagement and research.
Yeah. For me, sometimes when I've had trouble engaging with engineers, it's that I haven't really been able, and the same could be applied to stakeholders, I haven't hit the right level of granularity in terms of where I'm bringing them in. And so sometimes it's that you can overwhelm engineers and stakeholders with too much detail, or you're not necessarily boiling up quite the right information for them, especially if you haven't done the right job of setting expectations in terms of the value or the why behind this information. That's really what user research, personas, all of this research does, is it provides the why. I've found that when you can do that, anyone, and no matter what their role, appreciates understanding why they're doing what they're doing, the impact it has on customers. And so I think the first question you have to ask is, maybe of your engineers, why aren't you interested in the customer perspective and research? And see what they say.
Yeah, and there you might begin to look at, well, what are your measures of success? Like, how are you judging the success of this team, or how are you judging your own individual success?
Yeah, and also the success of the product as well.
Exactly, because then you can start to draw the thread between, well, if your success is linked to the success of the product, I can demonstrate to you how design thinking and user research are all great inputs into making this product more successful.
Yeah.
And therefore, hopefully generate the interest.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, though, people are going to be disinterested in a process if they don't feel like they've got any input or influence, or if no matter what.
That's totally right.
Yeah, so why would you care?
Yeah.
So it's just like if the business said that they were running a strategic review and it's like you could come and observe, you might go, like, why do I want to waste my time doing that? Like, I want to input, I want to be involved, but I don't just want to observe. So it's how can you draw them into the process so they're not just sat there appreciating it, but how do they begin to shape the thing in the first place? How can they help synthesize the outputs with you so that they can then see this logic flow into the success of the product?
Yeah, we talk about that a lot in our Essentials workshop, don't we? Which you've taught a couple of times. We have a module on synthesis. And one of the things that we push forward is it really is a collaborative exercise. And it is a wonderful opportunity to get outsiders to the design thinking process involved in a way that feels really tangible and like they're adding value. And so bringing engineers into, so they don't have to sit through every single one of the user interviews, which can take hours. As long as you have the raw notes that you've recorded and transcribed from each interview, you can print those out. And what we tend to teach is that, for 10 minutes, you go through, you read the raw notes from each interview. Everybody pulls out what's interesting to them, and then you talk about the Post-it notes, cluster them up, discuss the impact. And I think it's a wonderful way of really giving engineers an opportunity to get their hands on the customer voice and talk about what they find interesting about it, and contribute in a way that feels meaningful. The other area that I really love to get engineers involved in, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and experience with this, is prioritization frameworks. So post-synthesis, you've got all these insights, or you've got the features that you think you'd want to build, or the challenges that you want to prioritize fixing, or maybe ideas. You've done an ideas brainstorm. There's lots of different things you could prioritize, right? Maybe granular, UX changes, who knows? Getting the technical voice involved in the prioritization discussion, again, their involvement is super tangible. They understand what they're there to do. They're there to represent technical complexity. Their voice is really, but it's so beautifully sort of integrated with the customer value as well. So have you ever done sort of like prioritization framework stuff?
A session vividly stands out in my head at the last place I worked where, and I think one of the important things you mentioned there was almost like the altitude of the prioritization. So we're not prioritizing at a strategic level of initiatives or outcomes that might take us months to do. It could be that we're looking at what the next month looks like, or it could be that we're looking at, like you say, design feedback. But we used RICE as the prioritization mechanic.
I love that one. We teach that.
Yeah, that's in Essentials.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So beginning to look at what is the reach of the feature, what impact is it going to have, so measured 1 to 4, what's the confidence that we've got in that, and then what's the effort. And that really can be done as a team sport, so you can kind of get everybody's inputs into that, we can average them, and then we can get, as a group, we collectively believe that this is the prioritization. And what's great then is, post those sessions, if you speak to anybody on the team and go, why are we working on feature X, everybody just like that can say, I know exactly why. And it goes back to what we were saying before about successful teams. Well, successful teams are really grounded in clarity and focus. Well, if you've prioritized the things, you've got great clarity, and it helps you really focus on what the most important thing is. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the best place to start, though, and I'm just going to go back because I want to reiterate this point, is if you don't have teams that are engaging with the process, the first place to do is hold a retro and ask why. Just talk to them about, why are you guys not engaged? I think it's really important you guys know this stuff, you folks, and it just doesn't really feel like you're interested. Tell me what's going on there. Gather information. Treat people like human beings. It doesn't have to be something that's super fraught. Just ask. Because if you're confused as to why people aren't getting involved, but you don't really know why, it's really hard to come up with a solution that's going to fix that.
Yeah, especially if you're not prepared to put the time in to understand the why.
Yeah.
And it can be a lot broader than I just want to code. I think that's probably a stereotype, isn't it, more than anything else? You know, I've known people that, not necessarily in engineering, but they might be very introverted.
Yeah.
And it might be that in big group sessions where we're all synthesizing insight, that's kind of like a daunting place to go, and it's not a space that they want to be in. So
Yeah.
they might pull away from those kind of activities, and it might look like they just want to code,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's that the environment's not set up to get the best out of that person.
It's the same with the stakeholder thing. Like I heard a lot of people saying stakeholders never want to join on the design thinking user research. I believe having empathy for stakeholders, just thinking about it from this perspective, is you're inviting them into a process that might be incredibly scary for them, because they're expected to have the answers. They don't really know what's going on here. They feel really uncertain as to what their contribution is.
Mm-hmm.
And so they might just avoid it because it's a bit too scary. And again, I do believe in these circumstances, talking to other product managers about what they've done that has really helped, open doors and smooth that path. I think setting expectations, making sure agendas are clear, defining people's contribution to these sessions, instead of just them showing up kind of being like, well, what am I supposed to be doing here?
Yep.
It's our job to create the pathways, the rails that help people feel a little bit more confident in what they're going to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few parts to that, isn't there? Because it must be really daunting for someone to go into an environment where they're in a room of specialists and generalists that kind of know this stuff inside and out.
Yeah.
And they're going to go put themselves there and then be expected to contribute at the same level as everybody else. So that could be something that puts you off. I think the other thing is these sessions are often all-day sessions, or they're really long, and we might send them the entire series of invites and go, oh, can you come along to the research? And I think sometimes it's a reality check of like, there's lots of other things going on, and do you know what, if we can get that person there for half an hour or for an hour, define the input that we want them to have.
Yeah.
If we just want them to see it, that's fine, but be clear with them, like our only expectation is that you come and you witness the process.
Yeah.
Then I think you'll see much better engagement.
We talk about this a lot in a couple of our culture modules. The job of product manager is not easy, and a lot falls on our plate. And in these circumstances, it behooves us to make sure that we are hyper organized, that we have a death grip on the agenda, that we understand how we want the session to run and what individuals need to contribute, which is why I tend to spend a lot of time staging stuff when I have like sort of big stakeholder meetings, or when I've got a big session where I need a particular, I'm really driving towards a particular outcome, or I need a lot of contribution. I will spend a lot of time, I'll check the agenda, I'll go through the facilitation of the brainstorm or of the structure, and I'll make sure that I have a really, really, really deep sense of confidence about how I'm going to run this session, because then I can kind of keep the mercury sort of gathered up, because it is hurting chickens when you have a big group of stakeholders, but product managers are the ones who are responsible of making sure that that session's successful. So you have to put in that extra work, I think.
Yeah, and the devil's in the detail.
Yeah.
So like we were talking about engineers and getting them involved in the research. I mean, context switching is a huge problem for engineers. So
for everyone.
Yeah.
Context switching is difficult for me.
And are we littering these kind of sessions throughout the day and expecting that people can kind of pick up one thing and then jump into research and go back to something else? And like you talk about sweating the details, it's like, are our sessions at the right time for people? So are they like first thing in the morning before we're picking stuff up? Are they maybe at lunchtime, or at the end of the day when we can wind into things? So I think all of these things play into this kind of problem, and you're absolutely right. Like, it's our role as product managers is like sweat the details, be clear on these things, and then orchestrate meetings or orchestrate these sessions for success.
Yeah, absolutely. We are the process engineers in an organization. We're oftentimes the only role that will really play that think about how facilitation makes a difference to people, that think about how to make sure we're getting the best collaboration out of stakeholders, optimizing for other people's time. It's an added layer of strategy that I think most incoming product managers have no idea exists, and yet I have seen it be the make or break between an incredibly successful product manager in an organization versus a product manager who feels like they've never really managed to get much traction.
Yep.
It's all about those kinds of like that emotional intelligence of recognizing that everybody's busy, so I have to make sure that I've done everything I can do to optimize for their contribution, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Next question?
Yep.
Let's do
Let's
it.
go.
Okay. Oh, an easy one. Okay, so from the Foundations workshop in San Francisco, how do you transform a toxic team? Another conversation over pints with product managers.
Yes.
I think you definitely want to tackle this question after you've maybe had a beer.
Yeah, it's probably quite a difficult one to face into for a lot of people, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like, how do you define a toxic team? I think it's quite a difficult question to answer because toxicity in a team can come in a number of different forms, and there probably isn't like a one size fits all way of doing it. Which, to your point earlier on about community, that's why community is so important. So it isn't just, I've got a toxic team. It's I've got this problem in the team that's leading to these kind of behaviours, and then talking to different people in the community around, well, have you got any strategies for addressing this kind of behaviour, or have you got any strategies for these underlying problems that I'm seeing over here? And I think just looking at a team as toxic and kind of writing it off is maybe a little bit extreme.
Yeah, just the way that the question is structured indicates that there's some pretty serious red flags in terms of what's going on. And again, getting back to the PM role being a really difficult one, oftentimes if there's toxicity present in a team in whatever form, we have to start, unfortunately, by pulling up our big kid pants and looking to ourselves as to our culpability and responsibility in creating that toxicity. Are we as open as we can be? Do we treat our teammates as adults, as human beings that aren't just code monkeys or people who are supposed to get me stuff? And are we empathetic to our stakeholders and our organization about the difficulties? Are we putting in our due diligence to make sure that we are being accountable, consistent, organized? Do we show up for things that we schedule? Oftentimes when I have product managers who ask me questions of that ilk, I tend to get the sense that actually sometimes they're the problem, which is a really hard thing for people to hear, obviously. And I'm not saying that because I don't know any context other than the question. But I think definitely looking at culture and also things like emotional intelligence and asking ourselves, as product managers, do I feel like I excel in those areas? Because if you don't, or talking to people makes you really uncomfortable, or feedback is really hard for you, or you get really defensive, or there's a lot of you feel like you have a lot of arguments with people in your organization or on your team, well, you have no choice but to start with yourself and recognizing how you can build your weaknesses, and then move forward from there.
Yeah, and the key thing is, if you look at everybody else in the team, the only behaviour that you're in control of is your own.
That's right.
So you can kind of try and influence other people's behaviour change. You can change your own behaviour, you can change your own practices.
Yeah.
So start with yourself, understand your contribution towards that, because everyone's normally got a role in an element of teams when they go wrong.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that you were touching on is like the product manager is the metronome for the team. So it is kind of like one of the roles, maybe alongside a delivery manager, or if you've got like principal designers, etc., where they're setting the context for the team and they're almost like setting the bar. So if you're not showing up for stand-up, you're late to meetings, if you're not doing the basics well of having retrospectives, of running sprint planning, then everything else is likely to fall down. So maybe one of the things that this person could look at is, how do you go back to basics? How do you make sure that you're doing the fundamentals, and then kind of use that as a stepping stone into addressing some of the other problems?
Yeah. I always say, and I feel like such a broken record, and I've got a book that I've got to write on this, but in terms of a simple key that could potentially turn like the toxic lock a little bit, retrospectives again. Creating a consistent outlet for people to be able to voice their concerns and frustrations, and creating an action-oriented / accountable culture towards improvements. There is actually a philosophy called continuous improvement. It came out of the continuous delivery school, the concept like continuous learning, like the concept of all this continuous conversation is that you start something and the expectation is that it is never done. You're always pushing to prod, you're always learning about your customer, and you're always trying to improve the processes that run your team. And so continuous improvement is the expectation that we're going to, all of us, clue in to what needs improvement, and we're all going to take equal responsibility and show up to do that thing. And for me, retrospectives in whatever structure you use, whether that be happies, shrugs, sads, or stop, start, continue, or sometimes you can do retrospectives but where people wear the 6 hats. There's millions of different frameworks that you can use, so pick the one that feels appropriate for your team. But have the retrospectives start with weekly, I swear to God. And anyone who says we don't have the time, I don't want to hear it.
Make the time.
Make the time. Just make the time. It's Friday afternoon. Nobody wants to be working from 4 to 5 anyway on a Friday afternoon. Bring cheese and crackers and a bottle of wine, and I swear it will be the most valuable afternoon of your week. And it's a really wonderful way of helping people feel heard, and also helping you surface and prioritize the things that are really dragging your team down.
Yeah.
I think.
I want to turn up to your retrospectives with wine and cheese and crackers. They sound like the best.
Yeah, I mean, just make it fun, and that's the other thing, the facilitation of them, you have to make sure that they're safe spaces. So if you're coming from a really toxic team, it can start to be really uncomfortable. So you have to lay down lots of ground rules in terms of kindness, in terms of things not being personal, and really make sure that, again, your job is, I love that metronome of your team, is that you're also embodying and modeling the behavior you want to see. Don't point fingers, don't blame. It's a no blame culture, and it's all about being able to say, like, look, we don't want to make these mistakes again, so we have to talk about them honestly. So how do we do that?
And the more that you can run retrospectives, the more that you can avoid this toxic team, because without having the context of the scenario, if you'd have been doing regular retrospectives, you'd have had signs that you were heading in this direction. You would have felt that you were heading in this direction. And if you've not, then I go back to the start with you. Like, how have you not picked up on the signals, even if that's not in a retrospective, that you've gotten to a bad place? And that might signal that there's probably not a culture within the team to foster good feedback. And then that's another bigger problem, where you might again look to the community, especially if you've got an internal community. Could you get a product manager to facilitate a retro where maybe you're not there? Like you just swap with them, and you go run a retro elsewhere and see if they can unpick it. What can they get from that team? Because looking at any of this stuff with a fresh pair of eyes is always going to be really helpful.
And also, if you are the problem, which you could be, as product managers, we drive a lot of negativity sometimes if we don't necessarily have the maturity or the psychological safety in order to be the leader our team needs. Making sure that we're creating that safe space by removing ourselves to surface the issues is, I think, a mark of growth.
Yeah, I mean, how many times do we turn up after maybe a difficult meeting that we've had with somebody in the business or with marketing or a different function, and we come in and we just offload on the team? And they kind of sat there doing whatever they were doing, and then they just come in and get an earful from a product manager about how awful the rest of the business is. And it's like, well, no wonder you're going to start to create this toxic culture of like us versus them, or it goes back to your point around psychological safety and maturity. Like, are we mature enough not to bring that back home? Are we mature enough to kind of leave it where it was and address that in our own time?
And also just have empathy for the organization. I mean, that's the thing that I always try to do, is nothing is perfect. No organization is perfect. Humans are hard. And you have to be able to step back and say, wow, that was really shit. That felt bad. Here's why it felt bad. But can I recognize where this person is coming from? Sometimes it's about having empathy for your team as well, in terms of, like, as you, to your point earlier, like, why didn't I recognize that the team was trending towards this terrible spot? I mean, maybe you inherited a terrible team, maybe you walked into it. But in terms of that, having empathy, well, why is the team coming from this perspective? What's happened to it? Has it, just been completely burnt out because of the amount of work it's had to get done? Have we had competing goals? Have we had stakeholders fighting over resources? Have we gotten caught between two political factions? Like, what's caused, like, how can I start having empathy for how the team got to this place? And recognizing that, and talking about it openly, I think, is also another really great way of prefacing, the start of retrospectives, of saying, look, I recognize that the team's kind of gone through a really tough time for the last 6 months or a year, God knows how long. We're going to try to start doing this thing so we can start changing for the better, and start taking a little bit of control and volition to improving how we work with each other and with the organization. And I think empathy goes a long way, for sure.
And without all else, assume positive intent. No one shows up to work trying to do a bad job. Like, the positive intent is there. You just gotta, it's probably mispointed in the wrong direction. Have some empathy, like you say, understand where people are coming from, and hopefully you can get to resolving some of this problem.
Positive intent is actually a really, really powerful but simple thing that you can do. The other day, especially in the age of Slack and email, and everything's text message, and we all work remote, and so it's so easy to automatically assume that someone's tone is off or this or that, or get really quite shook up about something that you read when really there was no malice behind it. It was misconstrued. I had that the other day with my boss, James. I sort of was like, I asked something in the form of a question, and he said, "What's up with the snark?" And I was like, "There was literally no snark." So I called him. I said, "James, there was no snark. I swear. I just said, right, isn't that right?" And he thought I was saying, "Isn't that right?" And so that's the thing. It's like, and he had ended up having a really tough morning that morning. You know what I mean? And so it was great. And in those moments where you kind of have that sort of like, ooh thing, reach out, voice to voice, call someone, like build a bridge, connect human to human. And very difficult, easier said than done, but so important in those circumstances.
And that goes full circle back to where we started on community and community as a practice, because don't take that stuff anywhere else. Like, the community of practice should be a safe haven to start to talk about some of these things and unpick them. So always be assuming positive intent. If you're picking up on signals that maybe suggest something otherwise, remember you've always got that community there that's there to support you and foster answers that might come from other people's experience where you don't have the right experience or the right level of maturity to deal with the issue yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, positive intent. I think that should be like the key theme of most organizations who are attempting to foster good culture.
Always assume positive intent.
Always assume positive intent. Amazing. Okay, so we brought Molly to join us because we missed her so much, and she was such a good girl. But I want to thank Adam Warburton for joining us and tackling some very woolly, interesting questions from our product community. I want to thank Laura, who is our marketing person, Ross, who is our ops logistics / quasi-AV guy, and James Davenport, our videographer. And I want to thank you for tuning in and listening, and we really hope that these answers have been helpful to you. And I hope that you will send in more questions as you encounter new challenges in your product practice. Thanks, guys. Bye.